नमस्कार, आप देख रहे हैं CNBC आवाज और ये है खास मुलाकात। पूर्व वित्त और गृह मंत्री और कांग्रेस के वरिष्ठ नेता पी चिदम्बरम साहब की एक नई किताब आई है, स्टैंडिंग गार्ड अ ईयर इन अपोजिशन। ये उनके इंडियन एक्सप्रेस में छपने वाले कॉलम का एक संकलन है और रूपा पब्लिकेशंस ने इसे छापा है। इस वक्त देश में इकोनॉमी, पब्लिक पॉलिसी और गवर्नेंस के मुद्दों पर चर्चा बड़ी जटिल होते जा रही है और ये बड़ी दिलचस्प बात होगी जानने के लिए कि एक अपोजिशन लीडर के तौर पर चिदम्बरम साहब देश के जो मौजूदा बड़े मुद्दे हैं उसके बारे में क्या सोचते हैं। आपने सर हमारे लिए वक्त निकाला तो आपके साथ किताब के बारे में बात करेंगे, उसके अलावा बजट और इकोनॉमी के बारे में चर्चा करेंगे। वक्त निकालने के लिए आपका बहुत शुक्रिया। सर, पहला सवाल तो यही होगा कि अभी ये जो कॉलम लिखने की आपकी जिंदगी है, एक साल वाली जो आपने ये किताब निकाली है, इस किताब पर आपका फोकस क्या रहा है? इसको अगर एक समरी देनी हो तो क्या कहेंगे आप?
See, the Congress is now in the opposition space. I find myself in the opposition to the government. The role of the opposition is to criticize the government, to always keep the government on guard. And writing a column every week gave me an opportunity to examine closely how the government was managing the economy, how the government was managing conflict, how the government was managing the political diversity of India. I'm glad that I was able to write every week without missing a single week. And when you put it together in a book and read the columns in chronological order, section-wise, for example, there are about 20 columns on the economy. When you read the 20 columns together, I think you will get a graphic account of how the economy has been managed or mismanaged in 2015. Likewise, if you look at the section on politics, you will get an idea of how politics, the twists and turns of politics in 2015. It's a contemporary, relevant mirror to what India was in 2015. A tasveer hai.
आपने कहा कि ये एक साल में जो कामकाज हुआ है सरकार का, उस पर एक विपक्षी वॉइस के तौर पर आपकी एक कमेंट्री है और एक प्रकार का आईना है। तो अब ये बताएं सर, इसमें सबसे पहला सवाल मैं आपसे ये लेना चाहूंगा कि इकोनॉमी के मैनेजमेंट के बारे में एक जनरल कमेंट ये आता है कि हमने पहले से जो हालत थी उसको बहुत अच्छे से मैनेज किया है। बड़ी लिगेसी प्रॉब्लम थी, लेकिन अब इकोनॉमी बैक ऑन ट्रैक है। 7 से 7.75 का जीडीपी का नंबर वो देते हैं। कहते हैं कि फिस्कल डेफिसिट को हम अच्छे से मैनेज कर लेंगे। वो कहते हैं कि इन्फ्लेशन कम हो गया है, तो इकोनॉमी हमारी बहुत अच्छी नजर आ रही है। आपको कैसी नजर आती है सर?
No, I don't agree at all. The economy is not back on track. Let's take the three numbers that you have said. Firstly, you say the GDP is growing at 7.6%. So that's a little bit of an illusion there. The nominal GDP growth is 8.6%. They are using a deflator of 1. We have not had such a low deflator in 40 years. The Reserve Bank has commented on that deflator. I have commented in my book on the deflator. It is that deflator which is giving the impression that the economy is growing at 7.6%. On the ground, you don't get the feeling that this is a 7.5% economy. You don't get that feeling at all. The second one you're saying is about inflation. There are two things today. WPI, the wholesale price inflation, has been negative for several months now, almost 10 months. The CPI, the retail price inflation, has slowly inched up to 5.7%. Now what does this mean? This means that producers are not happy because they are not getting the right prices. The consumers are not happy because their retail inflation is high, especially food inflation. So I don't think the inflation situation is being managed. The fiscal deficit, well, we'll have to wait and see what the numbers are finally on the 29th of February. I want to see whether they have stuck to the target, a relaxed target of 3.9%. More than that, I want to see what is the target for next year. In fact, the whole world is watching that number. So let's wait until 29th of February whether they have achieved that target.
एग्रीड सर, वी विल वेट फॉर दैट। लेकिन आपको क्या ऐसा अंदाज लग रहा है कि अगले साल का टारगेट उसको वो थोड़ा सा लिबर्टी लेंगे, फ्लेक्सिबल बनाएंगे और फिस्कल डेफिसिट बढ़ने देंगे, क्योंकि उनको कहीं ना कहीं से जो सोशल स्कीमों पे खर्चा करना है या पब्लिक इन्वेस्टमेंट के लिए पैसा चाहिए उस पर वो ज्यादा बड़ा प्रायोरिटी इनको दिख रहा हो तो वहां वो खर्च करेंगे। लेकिन उसके सामने स्टेट के फिस्कल डेफिसिट का एक दूसरा बड़ा नंबर आएगा, तो क्यों 3.9 एक तरीके से आप कहेंगे कि इस लाइन को क्रॉस नहीं करना चाहिए?
I think it is a terrible mistake not to stick to the fiscal consolidation path. They made the mistake in 2015-16. I sincerely hope they will not make a worse mistake in 2016-17. You cannot borrow and spend your way out of your problems. That is not the way to manage an economy. The fiscal deficit must be brought to below 3%. We did it in 2007-8. After that, the international financial crisis created some problems and we had to go the other way. But from 2012-13 onwards, we've tried to bring it back under control. That is why we've got a fiscal consolidation path. This government has endorsed that path, but last year they departed from that path, which was a mistake. And if this year also they will depart from that path, it will be a terrible mistake. I sincerely hope they will not do that.
सर, आपका कहना है कि फिस्कल बैलेंस को जरा भी ये बिगाड़े नहीं, क्योंकि उससे बहुत बड़ी गलती हो जाएगी। लेकिन जो बात अभी तक सरकार कह रही है वो ये है कि हम फिस्कल बैलेंस भी रख लेंगे और पब्लिक इन्वेस्टमेंट भी बढ़ा लेंगे। ये पैसा लाएंगे कहां से वो?
I don't think you borrow and invest in the name of public investment. You have to raise tax revenues. You have to raise non-tax revenues. You have to attract private capital, both domestic and foreign. All that money must be invested. You cannot borrow money and invest. That's not the way to grow the economy. Which is why we give ourselves 3%. Up to 3% you borrow and invest. But anything beyond 3% is imprudent. If you ask 10 economists in the world, 9 will tell you that borrowing more than 3% is imprudent. And I don't think India can afford the imprudence that it followed for many years in the past. Those were bad days, and I don't think we should return to those days.
जी, 3% से ज्यादा बोरो करके निवेश करना खतरनाक स्थिति बना सकता है, ये आप कह रहे हैं सर। लगता है कि सरकार को ये भरोसा है कि इंडियन कॉरपोरेट सेक्टर भले ही अभी पैसा लगाना शुरू न करे, लेकिन एफडीआई बड़े पैमाने पर आएगा। और सरकार एक नंबर कोट करती है सर, वो है 39% का 2015 में, कि 39% एफडीआई बढ़ गया है। आपको लगता है कि दरअसल एफडीआई एक बहुत बड़ी पाइपलाइन खोलेगा हमारे इन्वेस्टमेंट साइकिल को शुरू करने के लिए?
See, I don't think there's anything great about this number. Since 2006-7, that is for the last about 7 or 8 years, FDI has been range bound, $36 billion to $46 billion every year. I think this year also it is within that range. There's nothing extraordinary about it. But I think somebody must do an analysis. I've not done it. Somebody must do an analysis. The FDI that is coming into India can be of two kinds. One, it replaces Indian capital. Second, it adds to the Indian stock of capital. How much FDI is coming as replacement capital? How much FDI is coming as additional capital? Those are the important questions to ask. The second question to ask is, where is this FDI going? Is it going into infrastructure? Is it going into manufacturing? Is it going into services? I think those are the questions that should be asked. I don't think you look at a number and then gloat and celebrate. We have had FDI of 44 billion and 45 billion in the UPA times also.
सर, आप हालांकि कह रहे हैं कि इसका एनालिसिस करने की जरूरत है, लेकिन आप एक बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग बात बता रहे हैं, इसको थोड़ा और समझाइए सर। आपने कहा कि ये कितना पैसा आ रहा है रिप्लेसमेंट कैपिटल के तौर पर, तो हम तो समझते हैं कि ये गवर्नमेंट नेशनलिस्ट गवर्नमेंट है और चाहेगी कि ज्यादा से ज्यादा ओनरशिप इंडियंस के हाथ में रहे, फॉरेनर्स के हाथ में न रहे। तो क्या रिप्लेसमेंट कैपिटल को हम बढ़ती हुई फॉरेन ओनरशिप के रूप में देखेंगे, और क्या ये एक सिग्निफिकेंट कंसर्न है आपका?
Well, I don't take the view that you take. You see, if an Indian owns a company, say he's invested 500 crore, now if he sells out that company to a foreigner, that capital that is coming to India is only replacement capital. The company's investment still remains only 500 crore.
Okay.
It has come from a foreigner and the Indian has taken back his 500. But if that Indian will invest that 500 in another industry or another business or another infrastructure project, that is additional capital. But if that 500 is not going to be invested again, then the FDI is only replacement capital. I think more analysis has to be done to find out whether the bulk of the FDI is replacement capital or additional capital.
Yes.
Secondly, Indians are also buying assets abroad. It is not as though foreigners are buying assets in India and Indians are keeping quiet. Indians are also buying assets abroad. Indians are buying companies in Europe, in America, in Africa, in Australia. They're buying mines, they're buying manufacturing companies, steel plants, automobile companies, software companies. So I think in a globalized world, I don't disapprove of foreigners owning some businesses in India and Indians owning some businesses abroad. I think that is part of the globalized world.
सर, एक बात आ रही थी कि सबसे बड़ा प्रॉब्लम जो है वो है पब्लिक सेक्टर बैंकिंग का, और उसमें एनपीए की सफाई बहुत जरूरी है। तो लगता है कि सर्कमस्टांसेस ने फोर्स कर दिया कि अब सरकारी बैंक अपना एनपीए पूरा डिक्लेयर कर रहे हैं, और इसका मतलब ये है कि अगर सरकार चाहे ना चाहे तो भी अब तो रिकैपिटलाइज करना पड़ेगा। तो क्या ये माना जाए कि पूरी इकोनॉमी में अगर एक सबसे बड़ा प्रॉब्लम बैंकिंग का था, तो वो एक्चुअली अब सॉर्ट आउट होता हुआ नजर आ रहा है, सॉल्व होता हुआ नजर आ रहा है?
See, I don't think you should mix up NPAs and recapitalization. Even if NPAs were low, our banks require more capital. Because unlike other industries, other businesses, there is something known as capital adequacy ratio in banks. If you want to grow your balance sheet, if you want to grow your books, if you want to lend more, a bank must have more capital. So even if the NPA problem is under control, you would have to pump in more capital into banks if the bank has to lend more. If the capital remains the same, the bank cannot lend more. NPA has added a certain edge to the problem, a certain urgency to the problem. Why? Because if these loans have to be provided for, that will eat into the profits of banks. If these loans have to be written off, the capital of the bank will be eroded, which is why NPA is a problem. It has to be addressed. The RBI is addressing it in a particular manner. I'm not disagreeing with the RBI's approach, but I sometimes feel that some deadlines that the RBI has imposed are a bit impractical. I don't think it's possible to fix the problem by 31/3/2017. I think the problem requires a more nuanced approach, a more flexible approach. But I broadly agree that the NPA problem must be fixed by the regulator and by the government acting together.
सर, आपसे ये भी समझना चाहूंगा बैंकिंग के बाद कि जो सरकार को जिस तरह का ग्रोथ चाहिए हमको, उसके लिए जो पैसा चाहिए, टैक्स से कितना ला सकते हैं? क्योंकि कहा तो ये है कि हम इनकम टैक्स की रेट्स अब कम करते हुए चलेंगे और एक रोड मैप इस बार दे देंगे। दूसरी तरफ डिसइन्वेस्टमेंट, हम हमेशा बात करते हैं कि एक बहुत बड़ा सोर्स हो सकता है एसेट को मोनेटाइज करने का। तो आपको लगता है कि टैक्स में ज्यादा गुंजाइश नहीं रहेगी वित्त मंत्री के पास और उनको ज्यादा पैसा डिसइन्वेस्टमेंट जैसे रूट से उठाना पड़ेगा?
You see, these are contextual. Whether in a particular year, in a particular budget, you can raise more tax revenues or you can raise more non-tax revenues is contextual. Only the finance minister who has all the information can take that decision. We can only comment on the decision after it is taken. But before the decision is taken, it will be very difficult to comment because I don't have all the information today. But all I know is that this government got a bonanza in low oil prices. I have estimated the bonanza at about 1,40,000 crore.
Right.
Now, where did this 1,40,000 crore go? There was a shortfall in tax revenues. There's a shortfall in non-tax revenues, especially disinvestment. And there is an increased fiscal deficit, not in percentage terms, but in absolute terms, because the nominal GDP is growing at a low rate. So this 1,40,000 crore has been spent to fill three large holes in the budget. Actually, if the tax target had been achieved, if the disinvestment target had been achieved, and if growth had picked up, this 1,40,000 will be additional money available to government for the public investment that you're talking about. Therefore, there was a great opportunity, but I think they muddled through their way in 2015-16, and the 1,40,000 has been used to fill the three big holes in the budget.
इस साल का जो बजट आने वाला है उसके बारे में हम ये सुनते हैं कि फोकस जो है वो रूरल इंडिया पे, एग्रीकल्चर पे और पॉवर्टी रिडक्शन पर, या कहिए प्रो पुअर बजट ये लेकर के आएंगे ताकि कहा जा सके कि ये बजट गरीबों का, किसानों का, ग्रामीण लोगों का और भारत का बजट है। आपको लगता है कि यही फोकस उनका पॉलिटिकली करेक्ट होगा, उनको रखना भी चाहिए?
Well, I'm glad you are saying budget aane wale hain. Everybody has forgotten Achhe Din aane wale hain. Nobody even speaks about Achhe Din aane wale hain anymore. That's okay. Now, the budget must indeed address the acute distress in rural India. I think this government has been quite callous, quite heartless in ignoring the problems of rural India. They have said themselves, this is the third year of drought. If there is 3 years of drought, if you don't spend enough on Maganrega, don't spend enough on Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, don't spend enough on irrigation projects, don't spend enough on infrastructure in tribal areas, and then you don't give them a reasonable MSP, minimum support price for their products. If rural wages are rising by only about 2% a year, all this clearly adds to the distress in rural India. If this budget acknowledges that there is acute distress in rural India, I would welcome it. For 20 months, they have turned their back on rural India. If at least now they will look at rural India, I'll be the happiest person.
राइट सर, आपसे आखिरी सवाल। आपके किताब के शुरू में आपने एक बात लिखी है कि आपको एक चीज अच्छी नहीं लगती, वो है पब्लिक डिस्कोर्स में सेंस ऑफ ह्यूमर की कमी। इनफैक्ट अभी का जो पब्लिक डिस्कोर्स का माहौल है उसमें बिकरिंग, बिटरनेस, एजिटेशन, निगेटिविटी बहुत ज्यादा है। हम लोग छोटी मोटी कोशिश करते भी हैं सेंस ऑफ ह्यूमर और सटायर और विट को इंजेक्ट करने की, तो उसका बड़ा बुरा माना जाता है। सर, आपके सारे दोस्तों को, पूरे पॉलिटिकल क्लास को सेंस ऑफ ह्यूमर कैसे सिखाया जाए?
Where is humor? I mean, I can't see any in speech and in writing, humor is dead. People don't understand satire. As I've said in my book, 2 or 3 of my columns here were satirical columns, but I'm told in the social media, people don't distinguish between satire and other forms of writing, and they went on unleashing a torrent of abuse. I don't follow the social media. I think it's a complete waste of time following the trolls. But my friends tell me that instead of meeting argument with argument, or humor with humor, or wit with wit, all that they do is heap abuse. I'm very sad that humor in public discourse is practically dead in India. Humor has been replaced by very vicious language. In the last few days we have heard people say, shoot his daughter, behead him, hang him. Is that the way public discourse in this country should be conducted? I'm ashamed by the language of public discourse.
बिल्कुल सर, आपने वक्त निकाला इस बातचीत के लिए, बहुत शुक्रिया। इस किताब के लिए बहुत बधाई। और हम अपने दर्शकों से भी यही कहेंगे कि अगर बड़े बड़े कॉम्प्लेक्स सब्जेक्ट्स को आसानी से समझना हो और उसको एंजॉय करना हो, अच्छा प्रोज क्या होता है इंग्लिश में और थोड़ा सा डोज ऑफ सेंस ह्यूमर क्या होता है, उसके लिए चिदम्बरम साहब की किताब पढ़नी चाहिए।
Sanjay, this book will come in Hindi also. The English edition is being released on Friday. For the Hindi edition, the Hindi translation is underway. The Hindi edition, I expect it to be out in about a month or so.
बहुत बढ़िया, ये भी बहुत अच्छी बात है। सर, वक्त निकालने के लिए आपका बहुत शुक्रिया। नमस्कार।
Thank you, Sanjay.